FUNES the Memorious. I think the first story I read by him was The Immortal. We might get to that one with episode 4 of Doom. I'm not going to read 3 stories tonight. 1 per half. Don't get greedy. I remember him. I have no right to utter this sacred verb. Only one man on earth had the right, and he is dead, with a dark passion flower in his hand, seeing it as no one has ever seen it, though he might look at it from the twilight of dawn till that of evening, a whole lifetime. I remember him, with his face taciturn and Indian-like and singularly remote behind the cigarette. I remember, I think, his angular, leather-braiding hands. I remember near those hands the matte gourd bearing of the Uruguayan coat of arms. I remember a yellow screen with a vague lake landscape in the window of his house. I clearly remember his voice, the slow, resentful nasal voice of the old-time dweller of the outskirts, without the Italian sibilance we have today. I never saw him more than 3 times. The last was in 1887. I find it very satisfactory that all those who knew him should write about him. My testimony will perhaps be the shortest and no doubt the poorest, but not the most impartial in the volume you will edit. My deplorable status as an Argentine will prevent me from indulging in a dithyramb, an obligatory genre in Uruguay whenever the subject is a Uruguayan. Highbrow, city slicker, dude. Funes never spoke of these injurious words, but I am sufficiently certain I represented for him those misfortunes. Pedro Leandro Ipucci has written that Funes was a precursor of the Superman, a vernacular and rustic Zarathustra. I shall not debate the point, but one should not forget that he was also a young tough from Fray Bentos, with certain incurable limitations. My first memory of Funes was very precipitous. I can see him in an afternoon in March or February of the year 1884. My father that year had taken me to spend the summer in Fray Bentos. I was returning from San Francisco Ranch with my cousin Bernardo Hato. We were singing as we rode along, and being on horseback was not the only circumstance determining my happiness. After a sultry day, an enormous slate-colored storm had hidden the sky. It was urged on by a southern wind. The trees were already going wild. I was afraid, I was hopeful, that the elemental rain would overtake us out in the open. We were running a kind of race with the storm. We entered an alleyway that sank down between 2 very high brick sidewalks. It had suddenly got dark. I heard some rapid and almost secret footsteps up above. I raised my eyes and saw a boy running along the narrow and broken path as if it were a narrow and broken wall. I remember his baggy gaucho trousers, his rope-soled shoes. I remember the cigarette he had in his hard face, against the now limitless storm cloud. Bernardo cried to him unexpectedly, "What time is it, Arino?" Without consulting the sky, without stopping, he replied, "It's 4 minutes to 8, young Bernardo Juan Francisco." His voice was shrill, mocking. I am so unperceptive that the dialogue I have just related would not have attracted my attention had it not been stressed by my cousin, who, I believe, was prompted by a certain local pride and a desire to show that he was indifferent to the other's tripatriate reply. He told me the fellow in the alleyway was one Irino Funes, known for certain peculiarities, such as having little to do with anyone and always knowing what time it was, like a clock. He added that he was the son of an ironing woman in town, Maria Clemente Funes, and that some people said his father was a doctor at the meat packers, an Englishman by the name of O'Connor, and others that he was a horse tamer or scout from Salto district. He lived with his mother, around the corner from the Laurel's estate. During the years 85 and 86, we spent the summer in Montevideo. In 87, I returned to Fray Bentos. I asked, as was natural, about all my acquaintances, and finally, about the chronometrical Funes. I was told he had been thrown by a half-tamed horse on the San Francisco ranch and was left hopelessly paralyzed. I remember the sensation of uneasy magic the news produced in me. The only time I had seen him, we were returning from San Francisco on horseback, and he was running along a high place. This fact told me by my cousin Bernardo had much of the quality of a dream made up of previous elements. I was told he never moved from his cot, with his eyes fixed on the fig tree in the back or on a spider web. In the afternoons, he would let himself be brought out the window. He carried his pride to the point of acting as if the blow that had felled him were beneficial. Twice I saw him behind the iron grating of the window, which harshly emphasized his condition as perpetual prisoner. Once, motionless, with his eyes closed. Another time, again motionless, absorbed in the contemplation of the fragrant spring of Santonica. Not without a certain vainglory, I'd begun at that time my methodical study of Latin. My valise contained De Viris Illustrius of Lomad, Quiturats Thesaurus, the commentaries of Julius Caesar, and an odd volume of Pliny's Nautilus Historia, which then exceeded, and still exceeds, my moderate virtues as a Latinist. Everything becomes public in a small town. Ireneo, in his house at the outskirts, did not take long to learn of the arrival of the anomalous books. He sent me a flowery and ceremonious letter in which he recalled our encounter, unfortunately brief, on the 7th day of February of the year 1884. Praised the glorious services my uncle Gregorio Haido, deceased the same year, had rendered to our two nations in the valiant battle of Itzvengo, and requested the loan of any one of my volumes, accompanied by a dictionary, for the proper intelligence of the original text, for I am as yet ignorant of Latin. He promised to return them to me in good condition, almost immediately. His handwriting was perfect, very sharply outlined, his orthography, of the type favored by Andres Bello, I for Y, J for G. At first, I naturally feared a joke. My cousins assured me it was not the case, that these were peculiarities of Ireneo. I did not know whether to attribute to insolence, ignorance, or stupidity the idea that the arduous Latin tongue should require no other instrument than a dictionary. To disillusion him fully, I sent him the Gradius et Parmasium of Quiturate by the work by Pliny. On the 14th of February, I received a telegram from Buenos Aires saying I should return immediately because my father was not at all well. May God forgive me. The prestige of being the recipient of an urgent telegram, the desire to communicate to all Fabentos the contradiction between the negative form of the message and the peremptory adverb, the temptation to dramatize my suffering, affecting a virile stoicism, perhaps distracting me from all possibility of real sorrow. Wow. The prestige of being the recipient of an urgent telegram, the desire to communicate to all Fray Bentos the contradiction between the negative form of the message and the peremptory adverb, the temptation to dramatize my suffering, affecting a virile stoicism, perhaps distracting me from all possibility of real sorrow. Again, the confessional mode, the anxiety of judgment, the fear of expressing oneself or the overexpression of oneself in hope of that solving something within. There's this mode of paranoia, of this urgency, of this wanting to cry out for the self, but at the same time wondering if the self is being too vain. I think you just gotta act, man. Indulge yourself a little and feel some real sorrow. When I'm thinking of this confessional type and the kind of types of people I see in this confessional mode, I think it really is just a matter of understanding the current figures of authority and the systems by which we measure justice are in need of redefinition. I'm not saying that all is lost and that there's a complete collapse of the system at play. Stop believing or having faith in those things. But we need to reconsider and restructure them, and I don't know, there's an admission of failure I think we're still hesitant to accept because we think failure means the end instead of a point of new growth or re-examination. But if we're too scared to even admit that we're in some sense failing, we can't really move on, can we? When I packed my valise, I noticed the Gradus and the first volume of the Nautilus Historia were missing. The Saturn was sailing the next day, in the morning. That night, after supper, I headed towards Funes' house. I was astonished to find the evening no less oppressive than the day had been. At the respectable little house, Funes' mother opened the door for me. She told me Aurelio was in the back room and that I should not be surprised to find him in the dark, because he knew how to pass the idle hours without lighting the candle. I crossed the tile patio, the little passageway. I reached the second patio. There was a grape arbor. The darkness seemed complete to me. I suddenly heard Aurelio's high-pitched, mocking voice. His voice was speaking in Latin. His voice, which came from the darkness, was articulating with a lingering delight the speech or prayer or incantation. The Roman syllables resounded in the earthen patio. My fear took them to be indecipherable, interminable. Afterwards, the enormous dialogue of that night, I learned they formed the first paragraph of the 24th chapter of the 7th book of the Naturalis Historia. The subject of that chapter is memory. The last words were, ut nihil non istim, verbis redritar auditum. Without the slightest change of voice, Aurelio told me to come in. He was on his cot, smoking. It seems to me I did not see his face until dawn. I believe I recall the intermittent glow of his cigarette. The room smelled vaguely of dampness. I sat down. I repeated the story about the telegram and of my father's illness. Oh, die Hamelsmamel, you didn't drink the espresso. You're gonna sleep soon. Weren't you sleeping during the day? What's up there? Or are you like the wizard from the Circular Ruins, which we read last stream, where in your sleep you are hoping to forge the reality of a man? Or die Hamelsmamel, are you still dreaming and perhaps the tulpa of another? I'd figure out how to test that.
That'd be pretty cool.
Maybe stay awake a little, chat it out with us. But if you need the sleep, completely understand. Heal your corporeal form.
You've reminded me that I also have a coffee, and I might have that coffee.
Yeah, stem up.
Little treats.
Jacob, how's the Hell Fortress going?
It's going rough, but I finally found where I needed to go. But now I'm getting some items.
Yeah,
to fight some
sweep that BFG.
These demons.
So it appears the protagonist of our story has met the Rememberer. This dude seems to be able to internalize data super fast. Also, he remembers dates and can tell time without a clock, which, in a time before the internet, quite the feat. Imagine in the 1800s, just knowing a dude you can ask and he reliably tells you the time. No watch, no wristwatch.
Every while.
No sundial. A super freak, super freaky.
Ow.
I now arrive at the most difficult point in my story. This story, it is well the reader know it by now, has no other plot than that dialogue which took place half a century ago. I shall not try to reproduce the words, which are now irrecoverable. I prefer to summarize with veracity the many things Aurelio told me. The indirect style is remote and weak. I know I am sacrificing the efficacy of my narrative. My readers should imagine for themselves the hesitant periods which overwhelmed me that night. Aurelio began by enumerating, in Latin and in Spanish, the cases of prodigious memory recorded in the Naturalis Historia. Cyrus, king of the Persians, who could call every soldier in his armies by name. Mithridates Euryptor, who administered the law in 22 languages of his empire. Simonides, the inventor of the science of mnemonics. Mitrodorus, who practiced the art of faithfully repeating what he had heard only once. In obvious good faith, Aurelio was amazed that such cases be considered amazing. He told me that before that rainy afternoon when the blue-gray horse threw him, he had been what all humans are: blind, deaf, addle-brained, absent-minded. I tried to remind him of his exact perception of time, his memory for proper names. He paid no attention to me. For 19 years, he had lived as one in a dream. He looked without seeing, listened without hearing, forgetting everything, almost everything. When he fell, he became unconscious. When he came to, the present was almost intolerable in its richness and sharpness, as were his most distant and trivial memories. Somewhat later, he learned that he was paralyzed. The fact scarcely interested him. He reasoned, he felt, that his immobility was a minimum price to pay. Now his perception and his memory were infallible. We, at one glance, can perceive 3 glasses on a table. FUNES, all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up the grapevine. He knew by heart the forms of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882, and could compare them in his memory with the mottled streaks on a book in Spanish binding he had only seen once with the outlines of foam raised by an oar on the Rio Negro the night before the Cobracho uprising. These memories were not simple ones. Each visual image was linked to muscular sensations, thermal sensations, etc. He could reconstruct all his dreams, all his half-dreams. 2 or 3 times he had reconstructed a whole day. He never hesitated, but each reconstruction had required a whole day. He told me, "I alone have more memories than all mankind has probably had since the world has been the world. And again, my dreams are like you people's waking hours. And again, towards dawn, my memory, sir, is like a garbage heap. A circle drawn on a blackboard, a right triangle, a lozenge. All these are forms we can fully and intuitively grasp. Irineo could do the same with the stormy mane of a pony, with a herd of cattle on a hill, with the changing fire and its innumerable ashes, with the many faces of a dead man throughout a long wake. I don't know how many stars he could see in the sky." These things he told me. Neither then nor later have I ever placed them in doubt. In those days there were no cinemas or phonographs. Nevertheless, it is odd and even incredible that no one ever performed an experiment with FUNES. The truth is that we live out our lives putting off all that can be put off. Perhaps we all know deep down that we are immortal and that sooner or later all men will do and know all things. Out of the darkness, FUNES' voice continued. He told me that in 1886 he had invented an original system of numbering and that in very few days he had gone beyond the 24,000 mark. He had not written it down, since anything he thought of once would never be lost to him. His first stimulus was, I think, his discomfort at the fact that the famous 33 patriots of the Uruguayan history should require 2 signs and 2 words, in place of a single word and a single sign. He then applied this absurd principle to the other numbers. In place of 7013, he would say, for example, Maximo Perez. In place of 7014, the railroad. Other numbers were Luis Million Raffineur, Olimar, Sulfur, the rains, the whale, the gas, the cauldron, Napoleon, Augustin de Villa. In place of 500, he would say 9. Each word had a particular sign, a kind of mark. The last in the series was very complicated. I tried to explain to him that this rhapsody of incoherent terms was precisely the opposite of a system of numbers. I told him that saying 365 meant saying 3 hundreds, 6 tens, 5 ones, an analysis of which is not found in the numbers, the negro tomato, or the side of meat. FUNES did not understand me, or refused to understand me. Locke, in the 17th century, postulated and rejected an impossible language in which each individual thing, each stone, each bird, and each branch would have its own name. FUNES once projected an analogous language, but discarded it because it seemed too general to him, too ambiguous. In fact, FUNES remembered not only every leaf of every tree of every wood, but also every one of the times he had perceived or imagined it. He decided to reduce each of his past days to some 70,000 memories, which would then be defined by means of ciphers. He was dissuaded from this by 2 considerations: his awareness that the task was interminable, his awareness that it was useless. He thought that by the hour of his death he would not even have finished classifying all the memories of his childhood. 2 projects I have indicated, an infinite vocabulary for the natural series of numbers, a useless mental catalog of all the images of his memory, are senseless, but they evidence a certain stammering grandeur. They permit us to glimpse or infer the nature of FUNES' fastidious world. He was, let us not forget, almost incapable of ideas in general. Platonic sort. Not only was it difficult for him to comprehend that the generic symbol dog embraces so many unlike individuals of diverse size and form, it bothered him that the dog at 314, seen from the side, should have the same name as the dog at 315, seen from the front. His own face in the mirror, his own hands, surprised him every time he saw them. Swift relates that the Emperor of Lilliput could discern the movement of a minute hand. FUNES could continuously discern the tranquil advances of corruption, of decay, of fatigue. He could note the progress of death, of dampness. He He was the solitary and lucid spectator of a multiform, instantaneous, and almost intolerably precise world. Babylon, London, New York have overwhelmed with their fairy splendor the imaginations of men. No one in their populous towers or their urgent avenues has felt the heat and pressure of a reality as indefatigable as that which day and night converged upon the helpless Aurelio in his poor South American settlement. Just overstimulated. It was very difficult for him to sleep. To sleep is to turn one's mind from the world. Funes, lying on his back in the cot in the shadows, could visualize every crevice and every molding in the sharply defined houses surrounding him. I repeat that the least important of his memories was more vivid and more minutely detailed than our perception of physical pleasure or physical torment. Towards the east, along a stretch not yet divided into blocks, there were new houses, unknown to Funes. He imagined them to be black, compact, made of homogeneous darkness. In that direction he would turn his face in order to sleep. He would also imagine himself at the bottom of a river, rocked and annihilated by the current. With no effort, he had learned English, French, Portuguese, and Latin. I suspect, however, that he was not very capable of thought. To think is to forget differences, generalize, make abstractions. In the teeming world of Funes, there were only details, almost immediate in their presence. The wary light of dawn entered the earthen patio. Then I saw the face belonging to the voice that had spoken all night long. Ireneo was 19 years old. He had been born in 1868. He seemed to me as monumental as bronze, more ancient than Egypt, older than the prophecies and the pyramids. I thought that each of my words, that each of my movements, would persist in his implacable memory. I was benumbed by the fear of multiplying useless gestures. Ireneo Funes died in 1889 of congestion of the lungs.